Have you ever noticed that when the world feels confusing, our first instinct is always to try and explain it? We gather information, we read the articles, we listen to the commentary, we try to assemble enough context and analysis to understand what is happening and where it might be leading. This habit of mind has given us many good things. It has helped us cure diseases, build technologies, and solve problems that once seemed impossible. The modern world runs on the belief that if we gather enough information and apply enough intelligence, we can eventually explain almost anything. But there are some parts of life that do not yield so easily to explanation. In fact, the most important parts rarely do. Love does not arrive as the conclusion to an argument. Forgiveness does not come neatly arranged on a chart. Hope rarely appears as the result of careful analysis. Because the deepest truths in life are usually known in another way, through encounter, through experience, through the stories we carry in our hearts. And that difference between explaining life and experiencing it sits right at the center of the gospel story we heard today. The story begins with a question that feels very familiar. Jesus and his disciples are walking along when they see a man who has been blind since birth. He is sitting beside the road where he has likely sat for years, begging from the people who pass by. The disciples look at him and immediately ask the question that seems most natural to them. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It's the kind of question people have always asked when they encounter suffering. We want to know what caused it. We want to know who is responsible. We want to believe that there must be some reason. But Jesus does not answer their question in the way that they expect. Instead, he kneels down. He spits on the ground. He makes mud with dust and saliva and spreads it across the man's eyes. And then he sends the man to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And the man listens. He goes. He washes, and suddenly his world opens. For the first time in his life, he sees light, faces, movement, sky, the color of stone, the shimmer of water, the outline of trees against the sun. It is a miracle. But what follows in the story is not celebration. What follows is investigation. His neighbors begin debating it. Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg along the roadside? Some say yes, others say no. Surely it cannot be him. But the man himself kept saying the simple truth. I am the man. Eventually, the religious authorities are called in because something about this miracle makes people uncomfortable, and they too begin asking questions. How did this happen? Who is responsible? When did he do it? Everyone in this story is trying to explain what has happened. Everyone except the man himself. The man does not offer a theory. He simply tells what happened to him. The man called Jesus made mud, put it on my eyes, and told me to wash, he says. But the authorities are not satisfied. The questioning does not stop. Again and again, they bring him back. Again and again, they ask him to explain what has happened. But slowly, something remarkable begins to unfold. The man who began the story as a beggar sitting beside the road begins to grow more and more confident in his voice. When they ask him again about Jesus, he takes a small step further. He is a prophet, he declares. But the authorities, they do not like this, and the questioning grows more intense. The authorities are no longer simply curious. They are trying to control the narrative. They want an explanation that fits the categories that they already know and trust. They want a version of events that keeps the world predictable and manageable. And if we are being honest, this moment in the story feels strangely familiar. Because we live in a time when explanations are everywhere. Commentary fills our screens, analysis fills our newspapers. We reach for the phones in our pockets to explain almost every encounter we have. And slowly, almost without noticing, we can begin living inside those very explanations, inside stories about the world where the voices we hear most always already agree with us, and the voices that challenge us begin to sound stranger and stranger still. Sometimes we keep searching until we find the answer that feels most convincing to us. But friends, clarity is not always the same thing as vision. A person can have an explanation for everything and still not see what God is doing. Have you ever noticed that sometimes the loudest explanations come from the people who feel most threatened when the world begins to change? And after a while, those explanations can drown out the voices of the people who are actually living the story, which may be why the gospel so often returns us to something simpler. Not explanations, but witnesses. People who speak honestly about what they have seen. Back in the gospel story, the pressure on the man continues to grow. The authorities call his parents and question them. Now his parents are afraid to say too much, so they keep their answers brief. He is our son, they say, and he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know. You'll have to ask him. And they leave their son to answer for himself. So the authorities bring the man in again. By now, the questioning has become a sort of interrogation. Tell us what really happened. Explain yourself. Give us an answer that makes sense, they command. And again, the man simply tells them the truth. One thing I do know, though I was blind, now I see. It is not an argument, it is simply his witness. And somehow that simple witness becomes even more threatening to those in power, because the man's story disrupts the categories people were relying on to understand the world. Fear makes us cling to explanations that feel safe. Fear makes us question the witness instead of listening. Fear makes us defend the structures that keep the world predictable. And before long, that fear begins to harden into a decision. And in the story, we can see this happening. The authorities decide that the problem is not just the miracle, the problem is the man himself. And so they drive him out. It is a painful moment in the story. But the gospel does not end there, because when Jesus hears that the man has been driven out, he goes looking for him. Not to question him, not to correct him, but to meet him again. And when Jesus finds him, he asks him a simple question. Do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man, who has spent this whole time telling the truth as he knows it, answers with the same honesty that he has carried him this far. Lord, I believe. And suddenly the whole story comes into focus. The man who began the story blind now sees clearly. And the people who were most certain that they understood the world have become the ones who cannot see at all. Jesus says it plainly. I came into this world so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. It is a strange way to describe what has just happened. But perhaps there are actually two miracles unfolding in this story. The first miracle happens in the man himself. He does not try to prove what has happened to him. He cannot explain it in the language the authorities demand. All he can do is to tell the truth he knows. I was blind and now I see. And somehow that is enough. The more the world presses him for answers, the clearer his voice becomes. The more others question him, the more he trusts what he has experienced, even before he fully understands it. But the second miracle is the one Jesus invites the rest of us into. The humility to lay down our certainty long enough to see something new. The willingness to admit that we do not see everything clearly. The courage to listen to a story that does not fit our explanations. Because sometimes we encounter God not in the explanations we construct, but in the witness someone else is brave enough to share. When we sit beside a stranger at a lunch table and hear something of their life we never would have imagined. When we listen to someone whose story has been ignored, dismissed, or pushed to the edges. When we make space for another person's experience instead of rushing to explain it. In those moments, something begins to shift. The world we thought we understood begins to look different, and we begin to see. And this is where the story reaches us, because the invitation of this gospel is not only to hear the man's witness, it is also to consider our own, to ask ourselves quietly and honestly, what is the one thing I know? Where have I seen grace break through? Where has my vision changed? Where has God shown up in my life in a way that I cannot fully explain? Because faith does not always begin with certainty. It seldom does. It begins with the courage to say, one thing I do know, I was blind, and now I can see. Amen.